this lesson, we're going to talk in a little bit more detail about the autonomic nervous system. So remember from the neuroanatomy lesson that the nervous system is divided into the central and peripheral nervous systems. The peripheral nervous system is then divided into somatic and autonomic. And remember, we said that somatic is our voluntary actions and autonomic is our automatic or involuntary actions in the body. So things we don't have any control over. The autonomic nervous system is then split again into the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. Sympathetic is our fight or flight response, and parasympathetic is our rest and digest response. So let's dive a little deeper into each of these to see what they look like. So the sympathetic nervous system, again, is our fight or flight response. This is what's going to help us be ready to fight off a bear or run away screaming, which is probably what I would do. So some of our more vital functions are going to be heightened. Our heart rate and our blood pressure are going to go up so that our cardiac output increases. We have to make sure that we're getting the blood flow we need to our brain and our lungs and our muscles if we're going to fight off a bear, right? Our air passages are going to dilate and we're going to breathe faster so we can get the oxygen where it needs to go. The pupils in our eyes are going to dilate or open wider so we can see better and take in our surroundings more clearer. And then our metabolic rate is going to increase. So our temperature is going to go up and our body is going to start sweating if it needs to make sure that we don't overheat. So all of these things together make sure that it makes it easier for us to handle this fight that we have to get in or to flee, right? But what do we not need to do while we're fighting off a bear? Well, okay, even though you may be scared enough to pee your pants, your body's actually going to slow down your urinary and excretory systems so that you don't, because it's really just not important right now. Our reproductive systems are going to be slowed down as well. No need for uterine contractions right now, right? And then digestion is also going to be slowed. The body does not need to be focusing its energy on digesting food. It needs to keep you alive, right? So we're going to see decreased peristalsis, which is that smooth muscle contraction that helps to move your food along. And finally, the last thing we need when we're trying to fight off a bear is a mouthful of saliva, right? We're trying to fight it off, not eat it. So we're going to see that decreased output from our salivary glands. So let's review really quickly. What happens with the stomach and the digestive system? It's decreased, less peristalsis, everything slows down. What about our kidneys and our urinary and reproductive systems? Slowed down too, right? We don't need to worry about that if we're trying to fight off a bear. And of course, no saliva, okay? So our pupils are going to dilate. They're going to get bigger so we can take in our surroundings. Our lungs are going to speed up. Our bronchioles are going to dilate so that we can breathe and get more oxygen. And our heart is going to beat faster. Our blood pressure is going to go up. We may actually also see some vasoconstriction to help increase the return of blood to the heart and the lungs. Now listen, this metaphor of fighting off a bear is just a way to remember what the sympathetic nervous system does. It doesn't mean that we only see it when we're actually fighting or fleeing. As we'll see in a minute, signals from the sympathetic nervous system are kind of always coming, so we need a way to counterbalance that, right? So that is where the parasympathetic nervous system comes in. This is our rest and digest system. So we beat the bear. We're all good. We're out of danger. Our body can relax and resume some of its normal functions again, like going to the bathroom. Have you ever been through like a haunted house or something and you're absolutely terrified, you're freaking out, you finally get to the other side and what happens? You have to pee, right? This is actually your parasympathetic nervous system kicking in and trying to bring you back down to normal. This is actually also why we see a lot of women go into labor after traumatic experiences. Their parasympathetic nervous system kicks in a little too hard to bring them back down, and they actually start having uterine contractions. And of course, now that we are resting and digesting, we can have increased peristalsis and increased salivation again. Again, the goal of the parasympathetic nervous system is to bring you down from that fight or flight response, let you rest and digest. So what you're going to see then is the heart rate's going to decrease, your blood pressure is going to decrease. You don't need as much cardiac output anymore, right? The respiratory rate's going to come back down to normal because we don't need as much oxygen. You're also going to see some constriction of the airways, and our pupils are going to constrict back down to where they were as well. And then, of course, our metabolic rate and our temperature will decrease back to a normal temperature where they need to be. Again, just trying to bring us back from where we were. So let's recap. The digestive system starts back up again. We see increased peristalsis. The kidneys and the reproductive systems will start back up. We'll start to see urination, things like that. Now, salivation will be ready for digestion as well. And then our heart rate and our blood pressure and our respiratory rate are going to kind of come back down to normal, and our pupils will constrict because we don't need them to be as dilated as they were before. Now, this all brings me to my next point here, is that the number one goal of the autonomic nervous system is to maintain homeostasis. Again, the parasympathetic nervous system is just trying to bring you back down. So when one system brings you up, the other one brings you back down, and vice versa. That's homeostasis. So these systems are working all the time to help keep you right at that sweet spot. Now, one big thing to know is that certain organs or tissues could have single innervation or dual innervation. Single innervation means it only gets signals from one of these systems, and usually that's the sympathetic nervous system. So you'd get sympathetic ramping it up, and then you just remove the sympathetic stimulus, and that kind of allows it to come back down passively. Or you could have dual innervation, which means both systems are involved. So the sympathetic ramps it up, and the parasympathetic brings it back down actively. In this case, we see what's known as antagonism and dominance. So let's look at this in terms of something like the heart rate. We know that the sympathetic signals are going to speed up the heart rate, and the parasympathetic signals are going to slow it down. Well, if you have equal signal or output from both systems, then the heart rate just kind of chills right where it's at. And that is called antagonism. They are equally antagonizing or opposing each other, so we don't see any changes, again, in maintaining that homeostasis. But if we see stronger sympathetic than parasympathetic signals, then we're going to have what's called sympathetic dominance. So basically, the sympathetic nervous system is taken over, so you end up with an overall increase in the heart rate. Now, if it's the other way around and we actually see stronger parasympathetic signals than sympathetic ones, then we have parasympathetic dominance, and we're going to see an overall decrease in the heart rate. So the body's just constantly going through these ebbs and flows of antagonism and dominance in order to maintain homeostasis. Now, super quick, I just want to touch on neurotransmitters. Remember, these are the chemicals that work to help send signals throughout the nervous system. First, remember that this is part of the peripheral nervous system. So these nerves all come off the spinal cord. So what happens is the nerve will come off the spinal cord, and it comes into what's called a ganglion. A ganglion is just a group of neuron cell bodies that are all in one place. And then it's going to synapse with another neuron, and it's going to keep going to whatever your target organ is. Let's say it's a muscle. So we call this nerve that is before the ganglion the preganglionic, and this nerve that is after the ganglion the postganglionic. Now, I'll show you where this comes into play. Our two main neurotransmitters in the autonomic nervous system are going to be norepinephrine and acetylcholine. Now, norepinephrine is also called noradrenaline. So adrenaline, fight or flight, right? So you're going to see this in your sympathetic nervous system in these postganglionic sympathetic neurons, okay? Now, norepinephrine or noradrenaline uses what are called adrenergic receptors. Noradrenaline, adrenergic, that's where that comes from. There's three types. You have alpha, beta 1, and beta 2. Alpha is in our blood vessels. Beta 1 is in our heart, and beta 2 is in our lungs. So I remember this because you have one heart and two lungs, right? So remember, with sympathetic dominance, we're going to see that vasoconstriction. We're going to see the heart rate speed up. We're going to see the respiration speed up, right? So this is how we make that happen with that norepinephrine or noradrenaline. Now, acetylcholine is actually found in all preganglionic neurons. Both sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems use acetylcholine in those preganglionic neurons. So acetylcholine uses what are called cholinergic receptors. So choline, cholinergic. There's two types. There's nicotinic, which is found in these postganglionic neurons here, and muscarinic, which is found on your target cells or muscles. So this is how I remember this. Nicotinic goes to the neurons and muscarinic goes to muscles or whatever your other target cell is, right? So the acetylcholine from the preganglionic hits the nicotinic receptors on the postganglionic, and the acetylcholine from there hits the muscarinic receptors on the muscle or the target cells. So these neurotransmitters are major players in our autonomic nervous system. As you learn more about various disease processes and medications, you're going to see how powerful of an effect it can have when either of these two things are altered. Okay, I know that was a bunch of information, but let's recap quickly. There are two divisions of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic is our fight or flight response, and parasympathetic is our rest and digest. So the two of these are constantly antagonizing and dominating each other in order to maintain homeostasis. Again, if one overpowers another, that's where you find dominance. The two main neurotransmitters that we see in the autonomic nervous system are norepinephrine, which uses adrenergic receptors, also called noradrenaline, and acetylcholine, which uses cholinergic receptors for the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, so that's it for our lesson on the autonomic nervous system. Make sure you check out all of the resources and associated lessons attached to this lesson. Now go out and be your best selves today, guys. And as always, happy nursing.